Thank you, everybody. It is fantastic to be here. Scott's conferences are the most exciting part of anything that happens. This is my first time at Controls Con. I spent some time at the ASHRAE conference. The fact that we're all getting together is really important for us. So I'm Bill Schwebel. I just joined Johnson Controls about 2 years ago. And really, I come from the industry really focused on doing digital transformation. So I started out in telecom when telecom was analog in the 80s, and we had two technologies. We had digital switching and fiber optics, and it totally changed the way we built our networks. Those analog networks had to be built in a certain way, switch versus transport, and when you had digital switching and you had fiber optics, you could change the way the networks behaved, and then we brought intelligence over the top of the network to do things like 800 number services and number portability, ISDN, a lot of those services that came into telecom. And I've been doing that throughout my career. So then I moved into the mobile space and the mobile internet space, and then I moved into the connected car space. We launched the first connected car right here in Detroit, Ford Sync in 2010. Alan Mulally and Bill Gates got together to build the capabilities with the car, and who knew how fast that would go. In 2010, it was all about horsepower and trim and look, and it very quickly became about technology in automotive and moving that generation through automotive. Then I got into the supply chain. And when I started in the supply chain, I started in the international supply chain. At the time, we could only find a container in the supply chain 40% of the time. Within 3 years, we were able to find a container, probably about 95% being able to find a container in its supply chain. And that led into warehousing and retail, healthcare, all of those industries that have gone through that transformation. Buildings is really that next frontier. We've had a lot of tech in buildings for a long time, but things are really changing with what has to all come together. And one of the key components of a transformation isn't necessarily the tech. The tech is an enabler. It's really about the partnerships and the standards and the collaboration that comes together to knit all these things together. So I want to tell you a little bit about Johnson Controls and introduce this notion of our open globe. And really, Johnson Controls really came together in its current incarnation about 6 years ago when we shed our automotive business and we shed our other businesses and we combined with Tyco to create a company that's purely focused on building technology. 100% of our focus is building technology. $25 billion company focused on all of those elements in the building tech space. And controls really sits right in the middle of that. And I'll talk a little bit about that. How controls really feeds into the building management systems and the intelligence systems in the building, but it also feeds into the mechanical, the big energy consuming systems in the building as well. So when we look at our open globe and our brand and what we stand for, number one, it's really our heritage. 140 years. Warren S. Johnson invented the thermostat in 1883. I still work in the building. Our first headquarters building built in 1895 in Milwaukee. We have 55,000 square feet of labs in that building. It's actually 7 buildings, so we can simulate a campus in that environment. And it's very iconic, and it's very indicative of the types of things that we see in the built environment. I'm quite proud to be in that and have that heritage and have that brand strength around reliability and what Johnson brings to the party. Sustainability has become a huge part of our focus, and we talked a lot about those trends and a lot of the regulatory trends. So when I look at some of the digital transformations that have happened in other industries, regulatory pushes have been a big part of it. The fact that you can keep your phone number when you go from carrier to carrier was a regulatory push. And there was a technology that came in to enable that, which was pull the phone numbers out of the switches and put them in the cloud. That enabled a lot more than just the ability to port your number. You could also groom your switches. So AT&T, for example, could turn off their switches in Dallas at night, serve Dallas, Texas region from Denver because of that technology. They had no idea the benefit, but once we put the technology in place, these other things started to happen. So sustainability is the same sort of push we see on the tech front for our industry. Yes, buildings consume 40% of the world's carbon, so it's a big problem to solve, but by solving that, we can do so much more in the industry. Innovation, focus on innovation. We know nothing's standing still. I'm super excited about how we're talking about technologies like 5G. The way we wire buildings, analog buildings, even IP-based buildings, the way we're wiring IP-based buildings is decades old, right? And there isn't really a good wireless standard to wire a building. You're down literally in the boiler room in a sub-basement, and you need to get wireless down to that sub-basement. And then I look outside my apartment in the 3rd Ward of Milwaukee, and I see every block there's a 5G tower already, right? So that technology is coming. That will change the game on how we connect buildings. We're seeing now buildings with 1 million points. How do you manage 1 million points in a building? There's no human that can wrap their head around that challenge. So those are the types of things from an innovation front we're looking at. And this digital technology, leveraging these digital technologies. And then, of course, the most important part to me really is the partnership. And I'm very pleased that Johnson Controls has the opportunity to collaborate and partner with many of the players in this room, many of the people you see up on stage. We're all partners. We call it co-opetition. We cooperate and we compete. That is key to any one of these digital transformations that has happened in other industries. BMW, Audi, Ford, Toyota coming together to establish standards on a connected car and leverage the data that each one of those vehicles generates in their network. The reason we were able to provide some of those capabilities was because we had the ability to collect all that information from all those vehicles. So Johnson Controls, our position is 100% focused on making our customers, our partners' mission more successful. If you think about the value chain and the number of people that are interfaced between my factory and a user of a room or a user of a retail space, there's a lot of connections that need to happen in that space. So our passion around buildings flows through all the way. We talked a lot about the mega trends in our industry. All these mega trends really play into our mission and what we as an industry are trying to accomplish. So we look at the shortage of labor, all the things we talked about today. Those are all things that are driving where we're going from a technology standpoint and embolden us to go solve those implications of those trends. And every one of those plays into our solutions as we bring solutions to market. We see a $450 billion global incremental opportunity around this, enabling this digital sustainability, environmental, healthy, all of these things that we talk about, all of these trends that we talk about. That's a $450 billion incremental opportunity. That becomes a really big industry. Real estate and buildings is already a big industry, but adding another increment of almost $500 billion opportunity for us in the industry that are playing in the space is really exciting. And it's definitely driving our business as we look at our portfolio across the building. It's not just the building automation systems and controls, it's the fire detection, fire suppression systems, the security systems, the access control systems, the video surveillance systems. It's the equipment, whether it's the major chiller equipment or the ducted systems or the ductless systems, the refrigeration systems. All those major systems in a building are the areas that Johnson Controls plays. And we're very large. We're a leading player. We're number 1 or 2 in most of the big areas that we play, both in North America and globally, with our residential business being our smallest in the kind of number 4 globally. But looking at the holistic of what we offer, our global products activities really enable a lot of what is used in the ecosystem. If you look at almost any building, you'll probably find a piece of Johnson Controls in the building. One of our pieces of equipment, one of our solutions, one of our capabilities in a building. And you also see how it interworks with the other systems in the building and the other, either we may have a solution and we may have a solution from Belimo as an example in the same building, and interworking with those systems is critical. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this transformation and draw some of the analogies from my career into talking about what we're seeing, because we're already underway in this journey. But if you think of a traditional building and moving to this, and we've talked about the connected building, what happens when you connect a building? Well, what happens when you connect a car in automotive? What was the one major thing everybody wanted to know? They wanted to know, how do I get there? How long is it going to take me? Right? So that's a piece of information. So I was able to connect the car and get that information and leverage cloud capabilities to get that information. And that was the fundamental killer app that drove the need to get cars connected. And you had driver connectivity, you had car connectivity, the car is reporting its position, heading, and speed. It's being aggregated into the network to provide that. But it wasn't smart, right? It's connected, but it wasn't smart. It didn't tell you, hey, the road's closed up ahead, what do I do? Or there was an accident, how long is it going to take to clear, and what do I do about it? That next step is really where smart comes in. How do I take that information from that connected building or that connected car and do something with it? I know that I'm going to have a problem. I don't even think about oil change anymore. My car tells me, and it can be really smart if it's connected and smart. It'll tell me exactly when I need to do maintenance or do oil change on the car. And those are the types of things we're starting to bring into buildings, but it's still very early. It's the dawn of a new era. These buildings, there's a well-known sort of crossing the chasm that happens right around 15% penetration of a technology where everybody starts to adopt it. We're still in that early phase of getting buildings connected, trying to figure out what to do with the value of that data. We started in earnest with chillers, big piece of equipment, big energy piece of equipment. When they go down, it's a big issue. We had issues last year with hockey rinks, with chillers going down in hockey rinks. You can imagine what happens in that situation if you're in the in the business of providing hockey rinks. Being able to predict that and do something about that is critical. That's a big piece of infrastructure. You can put a lot of technology and a lot of cost to support that. We're looking at air handlers. Air handlers, if you look at what's consuming a lot of the energy, chillers are actually pretty efficient. But what consumes a lot of the energy is what's happening with the air handlers, especially as you're trying to get more healthy air, outdoor air mix, pressure, managing pressure, et cetera. And there's not a lot of technology next to an air handler. I mean, you're lucky to have a controller, a variable frequency drive, et cetera. How do you optimize that air handler that's operating 20, 25, 30% inefficiency and really causing issues with the comfort of the space as well? So that's an area that I think the industry should try to attack. And how do we address that inefficiency in air handlers? I think there's a big opportunity. And then as we look at, what's the path to market, looking at some of the lighter commercial, if you look at where the technology came from in mobile, a lot of it came out of consumer. Our enterprise solution was texting and email with the BlackBerry. And then consumers got into the game, and look what happened, right? If consumers hadn't gotten into the game, same thing has happened in smart homes, et cetera. There's a lot of technology in a home. Very little of that is in the commercial space, in the enterprise space. So leveraging a lot of that tech is something we can do as an industry. So the final step is when we go into the full autonomous. And we have, obviously, our industry is called building automation systems, right? So we are already autonomous. So it's not like, hey, this is new. But then what do you apply to it, and what do you add to it that makes it interesting? I really like to look at these stakeholders in a building because this is really transformed. And Scott has spent a lot of time educating us on the importance of the master system integrator. And we all know at the lowest layers, the Division 23, the mechanical systems, that's where most of my revenue comes from, right? Most of my business comes from the classic Division 23, buying my equipment, getting it installed, servicing that equipment, letting the engineering operations group that's running the building run the building, dealing with service calls and parts upgrades, and then retrofitting, upgrading. That's where the lion's share of the revenue in our industry comes from. But it's truly, these emergence of the Division 25 and the integrated smart building spec, right? And what we're expecting out of that to serve all of the various personas in a building. It's not just the engineer operator of the building anymore. And the engineer operator is saying, oh, I need to write down some information and give it to somebody upstairs, or maybe send an email with the information. There's more stakeholders in the building that need access to that. And there's more of a need to integrate. One of the biggest complaints I hear from my channel partners is, Bill, I wish all your stuff worked together. It's much easier. It's very difficult to integrate a Johnson solution end-to-end. So that's an area that we are working on. And then ultimately at the top, at the portfolio level, It's how do I manage my portfolio of buildings? How do I manage, if I'm a building owner of several buildings, I talk to a hospital group with 220 hospitals, and you wouldn't believe the challenges they have trying to manage that portfolio on a streamlined basis. We brought them all to Milwaukee, to our Milwaukee office, and I had 5 of probably the best industry experts in the world talking about how they should retrofit those 220 hospitals. There were 5 different ways to do it. And everybody had remembered that one way, that one trick that they used to do that retrofit. But how do I bring that across the portfolio? And then what does that data platform look like to enable that at an enterprise level? So just on the digital front alone, McKinsey estimates it's a $50 billion business growing at 20% CAGR. I love businesses that are growing at 20% CAGR. So this is a space, and this is a space that ControlsCon really is focusing on, is how do we transform, do digital transformation, and how do we tap into that $50 billion opportunity. From a Johnson Controls perspective, we built out an end-to-end enterprise platform that looks at connecting all of these capabilities, not only Johnson Controls capabilities, but all capabilities. So those Belimo capabilities, those Distech capabilities, those Honeywell capabilities, those Siemens capabilities, all of the capabilities that are out there, bringing those together so you can solve problems for those various stakeholders in the building life cycle, which go beyond the traditional infrastructure, tech, operate sort of problem sets. And bringing those capabilities together, opening up, and then really working as an industry. Tom talked about the standards and the need for standards. It makes it so much easier. Just mapping points. That's one of the biggest issues that I hear from people. It's like, yeah, I've got all these points, but it's impossible to map. It's so laborious. How can we do a better job as an industry in carrying that information end to end and not having to repeat that information? That's one of the things that we look for as an industry as we try to solve some of these problems. We have a very broad portfolio. I have 60,000 SKUs just in North America of products that go across not only the building automation system, but the field devices, the complementary devices that go into a building, some refrigeration, then some specialty areas. We focused extensively recently on the critical environments area, because one of the things we learned is that critical environments in a hospital or a university, obviously in a pharma facility, generates 40% of that 40% carbon of buildings, 40% of those facilities, energy use is coming from the operating rooms and those critical environments. So we got into that space as well in our specialty products area. I just want to do a quick spotlight, because we were talking about networks, on EZ-IO, and really looking at all these classic network capabilities. EZ-IO, of course, really invented the IP controller 15 years ago. We brought it in the portfolio really, again, as one of the catalysts and the ability to have a solution that could really solve any control problem at the edge, but then also as a catalyst to drive this IP, drive the connectivity that we're trying to see in the market. And we've made this platform available to the industry pretty broadly to be able to solve problems and do things uniquely. I heard somebody yesterday talking about how they control their pool with an EZ-IO controller as an example. So, it's a type of platform. But it really shows you the kind of the phasing of these architectures and the phasing of these networks. And I didn't even include there's little wireless thingies on there, but really what happens when it's IP and what happens when these capabilities are embedded in that Belimo actuator fully, and you just eliminate those layers of the architecture that we're fairly dependent on from an analog standpoint, much like the switch versus transport sort of problem I talked about in telecom. We also have edge and platform-based artificial intelligence. We've talked a lot about artificial intelligence. We acquired a company 2 years ago called Foghorn, which really spent a lot of time solving problems on the edge with AI. And it turns out one of the problems they wanted to solve was AI issues and problems in schools, in K-12 education. So they focused, built their platform on Niagara, and really focused their AI solutions on buildings. So we were really super excited to bring Foghorn into the mix. And Foghorn is really being put throughout our portfolio. It's now in our building automation system portfolio. It's in obviously our enterprise platform portfolio. And those capabilities of this notion of edge AI and the ability to even put AI into a microcontroller, not even a microprocessor where you'd expect it, or a graphics processor, et cetera, but in a microcontroller to just look at one problem. So for example, that air handler problem, if there's a static pressure balance issue, for example, use AI just to watch that one problem. That type of capability now exists. So just to wrap up, we have a legacy of partnership. We established the Authorized Building Control Specialists channel in 1990. We have 190 players. The distributor, of course, Scott, the Cochran Supply, is a key distributor to feed into the thousands of system integrator partners that we have through the network. So the partnership is really a key focus for us, and it's been part of our tradition for a long, long time, and we feel we're really pioneers in that space. And then our focus is really around supporting partners, and what are we doing actively to support partners, and really taking you into the future. And we do have a tool called Solution Navigator. I'm not going to go through it here, but there's a way to learn more about it if you haven't been exposed to everything we offer on an end-to-end basis. Go to solutionnavigator.com to see what we can provide and how we support you as a channel partner, as a customer, et cetera, in your business. So with that.
Well done. Thank you, Bill. So, Bill, I got a quick question. I couldn't stop thinking about it because Johnson Controls, we work with Cantech, of course, on the security side. You guys have it all.
York Parts?
York Parts. I mean, but fire, security, HVAC. Do you guys strategize the holistic, bringing that together? Do you see that? Do you see that actually? Because we all have been kind of watching these disparate systems for years, and of course we can integrate them, but do you see that ever coming together, or could you just kind of?
Well, certainly there are certain areas where it does come together a lot, and some of it's behind the scenes. So in manufacturing, it turns out these systems, they're based on sensors, they're based on controllers, they're based on intelligent server sorts of capabilities. So there's a lot of collaboration just happening on the technology and how we realize the technology. But then how do we make these systems come together? And how do we bring this data together? Because I may see something from an occupancy standpoint in one place that I could use in another silo or domain. So that is really the promise of why Johnson Controls came together. And we're spending more and more time doing that, but it's taken a while.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a lot of legacy technology, a lot of legacy processes in the industry. They're different div specs. They don't cross. If you look at the overlapping channel partners we have, very few of our channel partners overlap. So there's a lot of things we have to deal with as an industry.
A lot more to go there. Great. Well, listen, we have time. Audience, any questions from the audience? We got mic runners out there. For Bill, for Johnson Controls? Right in the back there. Randall, right next to you.
So you were talking about taking some of your controllers and actually getting them to give us the analytics or actually making them tell us what's wrong with the system as they're operating. You were saying that's the future. I know you can do that right now. After we put the Niagara platform on top of it and actually have it actually, after we put our analytics into it, it'll actually tell us what's going on with the system and is the system actually operating properly on each facet of the operation. Are you guys actually really looking at that to actually give that type of system for us to give us that feedback? Or are we going to consistently have to actually put that on top while you're just giving us basically just a system that does basic functions?
Right.
Because that right there, I would actually want for my suppliers to be giving me, so I don't have to actually do this as an engineer over and over and over again.
And that's part of, we're talking about fault detection and capabilities, but that's part of what we're talking about as we flatten the architecture and make the buildings more autonomous, is putting that capability closer to the equipment, closer to the systems, closer to the rooms, closer to the spaces, so that autonomously a lot of those decisions can be made. So those are the things as we put in, for example, that foghorn capability, being able to change control, actually do control. It's very similar, back to the automotive paradigm. What's hitting those brakes on the vehicle? You don't necessarily want that signal to come in from the cloud. You need the node to hit the brakes, but you're crowdsourcing a lot of data to know what's the best pattern, what's the best way to recognize when I need to hit the brakes. How do I avoid a pedestrian? A car and a system, just software, couldn't do that. You have to learn about, oh, this is a pedestrian, don't hit that pedestrian. But that operation is actually happening in the automobile.
Good question. Any other questions from the audience? No? Okay. Well, Bill, that was awesome. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you,
well
Scott.
done.